my city, my job, my future job prospects, friends, and some family. That's what I lost. And $1 million. I mean, I gave up my whole life because I thought this was that important.
I have been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. One, I used to wear Levi's, and I don't anymore, but also someone who has gone through the culture battles in corporate America. Jennifer C., thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Is it C or C?
Say.
Say. All right.
Like Ron.
Ron Say?
The baseball player.
I'm going to pretend I know who that is, so I'm not embarrassed.
He spelled it with a C. I spell it with an S.
I like yours better.
Okay.
All right. First of all, what does it mean that you are the brand president for Levi's? And I see all your ads, and I see hip people hanging around doing nothing except being ultra cool all the time and posing. And so I bought a pair of jeans and nothing. I got nothing.
You weren't cool.
I wasn't any cooler, and no hot women started hanging out with me.
It was a false promise. Is that what you're arguing?
Lied.
Yeah.
You lied.
That's the stock and trade, isn't it, of advertising?
What does a brand manager do?
So brand president, and I was at the company for close to 23 years, so I essentially started my career there, although I had a few jobs before that. I spent 8 years as the chief marketing officer, which is a high-profile job. And I would say I made my mark during that time in the company. And ultimately, I was promoted to the brand president. So what that meant was I was on the company's executive team, reporting into the CEO, steering the direction overall of the company. And I oversaw all of I'm going to talk in businessy speak for a second, but all of the key functions that made Levi's Levi's. So product, all the design team, the creative crazy people, neat people who design the product, merchants, which is like the business side of product. So what gets assorted? How do you price it? How do you make sure it's all profitable? Marketing, building our stores, what those look like, operations, go to market, which is like how fast can you get it done, strategy, and a bunch of other things.
It's a fast-paced world.
Oh, yeah, because it's retail.
In a very competitive world, but Levi, the brand Levi, I mean, I'm always fascinated by brands, and that when you say certain things, when you say Apple, an image comes to your mind. When you say IBM, a different image comes to your mind. When you say McDonald's, they all have a different brand. Some of them are better at it than others. Some of them turn into religions. I would put Apple there, and I would even put Levi there, and that Levi has this brand. Interestingly, I found out over the years, people in agriculture never wear Levi's. They always wear Wranglers. Yeah.
So Levi's had some rough periods. So I'll say we in sort of past tense, at our height, from a revenue standpoint in 1997. And then we had a rough 10 or 15 years. Brink of maybe not making it. New CEO came in 2011. He was my boss. He's still there. And we transformed and reinvigorated the brand. We took it public in an IPO, became very profitable again, and kind of reasserted all that stuff, all the reasons people had loved us, they did again. A new generation, younger generation. That we had this sort of lost generation, right? We had my generation, which is X, and then we skipped millennials, and then we skipped Zs, and we had to kind of bring them back into the fold. They buy more. They want to be stylish and cool. So it is a brand, and it sort of punches above its weight class in terms of the passion and loyalty, meaning in terms of its size. Because the brands you named, like Apple, I would put Disney. There's like
Disney.
These insane Disney people who go to the park like twice a year for 30
Yeah, my kids.
Okay, so that's you.
Yeah.
Levi's is significantly smaller than the Apples, Disneys, and even Nike's is another one. Nike within apparel probably has the most fanatic consumer base. But people love Levi's. And
some people like particular Levi's. I need my 505s or whatever. I could never figure out the numbers. I don't want to talk about
they do.
Levi's.
You're right, though.
Much.
They have people. It's a love brand or a love mark. Yeah.
It's
not
comfort.
Just jeans.
It's a comfort. It's you know what Levi is. All right. Levi's was headquartered in San Francisco. Correct? Is. San Francisco is a wacky, woke place. I live in Boulder, Colorado, which is the Berkeley of the Rockies.
Yeah.
So I'm I'm the iconoclast there. I'm the exception, and it's really lonely. Because you're there with a bunch of elitists who know how other people should live and know what words people should use. When you left Levi, it was a national story. And yeah, I know inside the industry, if a brand president leaves a company, yeah, it would be in the trade rags. It would be known. It might be in the business section of the paper. It wouldn't be news the way it was for you. What was your sin?
Well, part of the reason it was in the news because of how I did it. But my sin, after close to 23 years at the company and more than 30 years living in San Francisco, was that I pushed back on public school closures and pandemic policies during COVID, mostly school closures. I was focused primarily on restrictions that impacted children. School closures, playgrounds were closed in San Francisco for 9 months.
And in Boulder.
We lived in an apartment. It's a city, no backyard. I'm not crying poor. I had a nice apartment, but there was nowhere for the kids to play. Beaches closed. Basketball courts were boarded up.
You've got kids.
I have 4 children.
All right, so
that was my sin. And it was a battle.
I'm so confused here. Help me, Jennifer. The company for which you worked made denim products and other apparel. Were you speaking on behalf of Levi when you would tweet out something against these shutdowns? I mean, I'm trying to understand what jeans have to do with school closures, because in my mind, they don't cross at all.
They don't. And if I try to explain what they were thinking, which I don't agree with, I had a very prominent role in the company. I was an officer of the company. I wasn't just any employee. And so the thinking went that when I vociferously argued against these policies put forth by the governor of California,
the governor of Colorado,
I won't say the mayor of San Francisco because she fought it. She actually pushed back on it and lost. She sued the school district. So she actually agreed with me.
I sued my school district as well and lost.
So the theory went that when I spoke on behalf of the company by virtue of my position. All you had to do was go online, and I was listed as a key, member of the executive team and an officer of the company. And I'll admit, before I started doing this, first of all, I wasn't an active Twitter user, and that's where all the kind of shenanigans ended up happening, although I was doing lots of other stuff like leading rallies and attending school board meetings. Before that, I did have my title and primarily used that social media handle for Levi's stuff. I took it out when all this started. And I did try to...
So you spoke for yourself. You didn't
I was
speak
very
for
clear I was speaking for myself. But their assertion was, that's really not possible. You're the president or the CMO or whatever, because it changed over I got promoted during all this, so I was doing a good enough job.
You're in the C-suite, they would call it.
Yeah.
Right, so let me go at it this way. You shouldn't be talking about these things because you're speaking, people associate you with our company. And therefore, we have a right to say, stop doing that.
But there was no social media policy. Employees were under no obligation. And I had expressed my political views, which you likely disagree with, and I probably disagree with a lot of them now. In the past, I had expressed my, favor for one candidate or another. Usually the further left, the better. No one cared about any of that. That's
the point that amazes me. That my sense is, if you took the opposite approach, tell me if I'm wrong, if you said, we need to keep these schools closed because lives matter. If you took the other way, just like you did before with all your other political statements,
it would have been fine.
You'd still be there today.
Yeah, it would have been fine. But here's the real kick in the pants. And this is when I really when I got set on fire. So the schools closed, I think it's March 13th, 2020. Public schools I'm talking about. In the beginning, all the schools were closed. Right. By September of 2020, all the private schools and Catholic schools, those all opened. it was public schools that remained closed. Public schools where my children went. I was the only executive that sent our kids to public schools.
Stop there for a second, because I find this fascinating. Because so often the elite in our society say one thing and then live a different life. It's very much like a bunch of our politicians who are pro-government schools but send their kids to a fancy private school.
Yes, Gavin.
Gavin. I sent my kids to the public schools, and those public schools failed my children, particularly my son with Down syndrome, because online education doesn't work for him. He needs to be physically engaged. He regressed. And so it was discrimination. It was discrimination against kids like mine. And because you weren't elite enough to send your kid to the schmancy private school, you lost out.
Yeah. So, and I have 4 children. 2 are grown, pretty much, 21, 19, and then I have 2 much younger, 8 and 5. My older children went all the way through San Francisco public schools. I believe in public schooling. I feel like it's the backbone of our society. It's where our children get educated. If you want your children to be part of the community, I don't feel the need to shield my children from experiences or other people. I want them to know their neighbors. Like I just believe in it. I never had any, in the beginning, 21 years ago, maybe I couldn't have afforded private.
Right.
A few years in, I probably could have. And now or later, now I don't have a job, but later I definitely could have, but I'm committed to public schools. And my kids did very well in them. My oldest graduated from a UC just a few months ago. I am a strong supporter of the public schools, and I think you have to put your money, or in this case, your children, where your mouth is.
Not when it comes to COVID, because the people who tried to lock us down were the people who are out jumping airplanes, like our mayor who said stay home for Thanksgiving but was on an airplane.
Yes.
Gavin Newsom going to restaurants. You can go it was just ridiculous.
Yeah. So the really messed up part is, I had started from the very beginning. I thought literally from March 2020 that it was wrong. Yeah. And I was reading like an insane person, all the data, everything I could get my hands on. But by the time fall came around, and every single one of my peers sent their kids back to school, to private school, and they still told me, you can't say these things. You can't push back on public health authorities in this city. That's when it's hard to describe the feeling. Like,
try to describe it.
Why on earth do you think your kids get to have something that mine don't? And more important than mine, the disadvantaged children that live 1 block away from me, who, by the way, aren't in some big fancy house. They're in a 2-room apartment with nowhere to play, with no adults home to supervise. Why do you think you get that? All your assertions about caring about equality and equity and all this stuff, there is nothing more significant and structurally classist and racist than shutting the public schools but leaving private open. So at that point, even though I had been warned already, starting in the summer of 2020, that I needed to tone it down, there was no way I was going to.
You're fighting for kids.
I was fighting for kids, and my background, which I can mention briefly, has something to do with that. But yes, I was fighting for children. And the ones who get ignored, and the ones who are already starting out in a hole, and they're disadvantaged, whether it's a child who has learning challenges, or whether it's a kid from a low-income home.
I mean, I think about what I went through, and I have no problem directly contacting the super for the district, the superintendent, the board members. I have no problem going to the press. I have no problem going. I got a bit of a megaphone, and I used everything. And I keep thinking about some of these families that my son goes to school with, who are English as a second language, or they're not familiar, or they just are timid and don't want to, worried that if they make waves, it's going to be tougher. And it made me feel like I had even more of a responsibility to try to do this.
I think, one thing I would add, and, I only got here in the middle of it all to Colorado, so I can't speak to what it was like really in the beginning. But in San Francisco, I mean, the terror everywhere was real, yellow tape on playgrounds.
They had it here.
And so a lot of parents, what is often said is, who do you think you are, white lady standing up for these kids? But I think the message was just one of sheer terror. You need to keep your children home or they will die and you will kill teachers. And if you even questioned it, you were made to feel like a murderer. But so there weren't many people challenging. I mean, I started having rallies in, late fall of 2020 and, there were 10 of us at first and then more eventually came. But I read this really interesting study in the fall of 2020. I think that's when it was. The clearest indicator of parents being willing to send their kids back to school and believing that they are safe is open schools. So the minute they opened, it's a strong signal that it could be done safely, and then parents weren't afraid anymore. The longer they were closed, the longer parents were actually afraid. And they were afraid and they were misled because schools in places like Florida and Texas had opened in August and Georgia, and it was fine. Schools in Denmark opened 1 month, 4 weeks into the whole thing. In April, government leaders said
Sweden did it
never closed
and never had the problems.
Right.
I'm going to bounce around here a little bit.
Sorry.
Now that we're mostly past that, and the evidence is coming in, and you have policymakers admitting to their credit, man, we were wrong. We lost a year of education.
I don't think they're admitting it. I think they're saying Governor Hochul, New York governor, 2 weeks ago said, closing schools, boy, was that a mistake. Sort of like it just happened and no one did it. I mean, she was the lieutenant governor at the time. I found tweets of her being very supportive, throughout the process for a full year.
I guess my question is, you have been vindicated, but there won't be any parade to say, no. We here at Levi, Jennifer, you were right. You were absolutely right. And we were wrong to hurt these kids and be part of the system that kept them out of school.
Yeah, I mean, since it's all gone down, they see that writing on the wall because it was February when I quit very publicly. And they could see the writing on the wall that where this was going. Like it was going to be clear that closing schools was really, really bad. And so then they sort of changed what they were saying. It was like, well, that wasn't it. Of course you could fight for open schools, but you were challenging public health and that's not okay. But it was public health that kept the schools closed. So that doesn't make any sense.
Go back to the one thing that you said about because you wanted the schools open, you wanted people to die. And I heard this all over. I live in Boulder. I live in the version in Colorado that is San Francisco. And to open the schools was genocide.
Yeah.
And that's why you're a fascist if you want to do this. You're not following the science, which means you believe in some hocus pocus, fundamentalist silliness, and therefore you think God's going to take care of you. And no, we know that you're trying to kill kids. You're just too stupid to know that. And teachers. And to say, well, I don't want to force anyone into school. You don't want to send your kid to school, don't send your kid to school. But my kid needs to go to school.
Yeah.
For him.
Yeah.
He is going to have a shortened life because of his Down syndrome. He doesn't know how to read. He doesn't know how to write. And every day he's in school gives him a bit more advantage of learning. And it has this ripple effect through the rest of his life. And I only have so much time. It was interesting, at the end of our, at the beginning of the suit, we finally did a last best offer. Listen, tell you what, give us $15,000. That's it. $15,000 so we can hire private speech coaches to catch up on what he's losing.
Yeah.
And the school district said no, but they were all using outside counsels. So they're probably using hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight this in court because they don't want the precedent of putting a kid first.
Yeah. Yeah. The breadth of kids harmed, the scale of it is astonishing. I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, there's over 50 million public school kids in basically deep blue cities, Democratic strongholds, were kept out of school for over a year. If you think a 6-year-old can do Zoom school, you're mistaken. like push this button that says he can't read.
Right.
And he only got an hour of instruction a day, which we didn't make him do because it was stupid. It was just stupid. A 6-year-old.
I was there every day. It was stupid.
It was really stupid. Teenagers were depressed and isolated. I make a documentary film, as I told you earlier. I talked to a teenager in San Francisco. He didn't leave his room for a year. He didn't go outside. I mean, these kids were depressed. So
it begs the question. If you were going to be responsible for the genocide that you were going to, the murder because you were going to open up schools, then what about those who close the schools and use social media to keep them closed? Do they have a responsibility for this kid who is locked in his room for a year, the mental damage, the suicides that are coming out, the acts of violence that are coming out? Do they, from the same logic, don't they have culpability in this?
I believe that the government leaders and appointed public health bureaucrats that made these decisions do have culpability, and I believe they need to be held accountable.
How would you do that?
Everyday citizens who wanted one thing or the other, not really. The public health people, I don't know what you do because they're all appointed. But the government leaders, you do it by voting. I mean, I don't know another way. You tell
here in the
me
state, now I know you're new here. Of course, elections have consequences. And after 2001, after 9/11, lots of states, including Colorado, went through and strengthened their emergency procedures to centralize power in an emergency, which gave our governor, and likely your governor in California, unlimited power. And it wasn't checked. It wasn't something that he needed to go back to the legislature every 90 days and say, will you extend the emergency powers?
It's still in place in California.
It's still in place here.
I didn't know.
The democratically controlled legislature had an opportunity over and over again to change that and say, 90 days, 120 days, whatever, you have to go to the legislature and have a check and balance. And so who puts in the health boards? They're all appointed.
Yes.
So you're angry at a governor who's very popular, but there's no check and balance. Your local health boards are all appointed, and so you can't get rid of them. So it takes change.
It takes a long time.
I want to make sure we have some time to talk about your firing.
Yeah.
You were. It's always a good.
No, it's okay.
So here you are stating what now is obviously the truth, but back then was blasphemy because you're a racist murderer, a privileged white girl who hates poor kids. How did they fire you?
So as it is done with senior executives, you could call it not really a firing, but a separation.
I love it. They talk. We should talk about an exit strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
And they talk about a compensation package.
That's right. So it was all under the guise because I was positioned to be the next CEO and the first female CEO. I mean, I had up until COVID, I had enthusiastic supporters within the organization. People really did like me a lot. They would have loved to have been able to appoint a CMO or a female CEO who had come up through the ranks. What a great story. But I wouldn't shut my mouth. And I did get promoted to president in the middle of all of it, which I think is a testament to the fact that I was doing a good job, but it all just became too much for them. Under the guise of a background check before I could possibly be CEO. And I never saw the background check, let me be clear. But it was like, oh, you could be the CEO, but we need to do this background check on you and your husband, who's been a very vocal voice in all of this as well. He's actually been banned from Twitter.
By the way, lots of us have.
Yeah. It was financial entanglements, have you ever committed a crime? And, we need to do your social media. And I kind of knew at that moment, that was in the fall of 2021, well, they're going to use this as the way to push me out because it'll be a gray area. It won't be like black or white, she has to go, but they'll be able to say this is too risky based on what you've been saying for the last 2 years.
Again, if you said the opposite.
That's right.
You said keep your kids at home, save lives. Yeah. If you were part of the chorus to keep kids from having
That
an
would have been
education.
fine.
It would have been fine.
I mean, I would argue if they'd waited 2 months, it would have been fine, and they might have felt a little sense of pride about it. You know, the day after I quit, 3 San Francisco school board members were recalled for not opening schools. It was literally the day after. Like, a few months into it, they could have been like, hey, we had someone ahead of this.
They could have had the next CEO not only be a woman, but also be a brave woman who stood up not only to the bureaucracy in Levi, but the bureaucracy in San Francisco.
Right. But it was just too crazy. So anyway, after the background check was done, I was waiting and waiting for the call. It never came. He doesn't like hard conversations, so I figured he was kind of avoiding it. And eventually it came. I think it was December of 21. And, you know, based on the things you've been saying, there's just not a place for you going forward. And because your role, this is corporate speak, is the feeder role for the CEO, we can't have you in that chair because that prevents us from having a succession plan. So you can't keep your role because you can't be the CEO.
That couldn't be more clear cut of, you wrote these things on Twitter, we're firing you for that.
We're letting you go and we'll give you a quote unquote soft landing, which is money.
Money's good.
Money's good. Especially if you don't know if you're ever going to get a job again. But here's the thing. This is the sort of, so I took in what he said. They never sent me the package, the document, even though I asked for it multiple times. But I knew
Which document?
Meaning, like, here's your severance package, here's the money, here's the conditions. But I knew. I have been in corporate America for 30 years. When you accept a package, you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Right. And that non-disclosure agreement would not have prevented me from continuing to fight for kids, but it would have prevented me from talking about the terms of the departure. The terms being, you can't say that, so you have to go.
You can't tell what really happened here at Levi when we shut you up and fired you. Might I ask?
So I didn't want to do the terms.
What were they going to pay you?
$1 million.
How stupid are you? It's $1 million. That's $1 million. I had a million reasons why you should never talk about the firing. Why did you feel that it was so important? It was worth $1 million to be able to speak up about.
Because as the whole thing progressed over the course of 2 years, and I had a long history of child advocacy, so this wasn't new for me, and I can get to that in a second, I was increasingly alarmed about the illiberalism and the suppression of speech and the sort of abandoning of due process. Things I thought were progressive values, certainly classical liberal values, things that I had been very committed to my whole life. I mean, everybody tells the story. I'm Jewish. Everyone always tells the story about the ACLU fighting for the Nazis to march in Skokie. Like, this is the war.
I hold that up of what liberals used to do. That Skokie case where you have Jewish lawyers saying that even these neo-Nazi pieces of garbage have a right to free speech. And I wonder what happened to those liberals today when you can't even speak about how you feel about anything.
Yeah.
So, this is where I learned of you, because when you refused $1 million severance so that you and I could have a conversation about this, I thought that was one of the most brave things I've ever seen.
Or stupid, but yeah.
For me, it'd be stupid because I don't have any money. For you, what a brave thing to do, because there are no more classic liberals out there standing up and saying what needs to be said.
Well, here's the thing. Look, I was a well-paid executive, not as well as a lot of my peers, but I was a well-paid executive for many years. I'm not stupid. I'd squirreled it away. I can't not work forever, but I'm okay for a little bit. So I knew that. I'm a good planner. You know who's brave? People who refuse to get vaccinated and don't have a lot of money and walked away from their job. So I don't want to kind of over-tout my courage. I have a nest egg, but $1 million. It's a lot of money.
That's still a tough thing.
It's a lot of money.
I've known teachers who have moved out of their districts because they didn't want to get a vaccination. I'm just curious. Were you vaccinated?
I got my 1-dose J&J in June of 21. I mean, it there was pressure. I was in enough trouble already. I was like, I'm not afraid of COVID, and I'm not afraid of the vaccine. I'm just going to do this and
So you
knock
did it to placate.
Yeah, I had enough problems already. I wasn't trying to create more. But I've never had COVID with my little one dose.
Well, I got the vaccine, and then I got COVID.
As one does.
As one does. What gets me about this?
I was quiet on the vax mandates, by the way.
If it wasn't for what was going on, would you have been quiet about the vax mandates? If you could speak your mind.
No, I wouldn't have been, but that was a company policy. They do still have that policy, and I was careful not to go against explicit company policies, if you see what I mean.
So our founders said we have freedom of speech. The loophole here is that's not government telling you can't speak, but it is your livelihood. It is the how you feed your kids.
Yeah.
They tell you you don't have a speak.
That's true.
And I have mixed feelings about this until I realize that, wait a second, but it only goes in one direction. So if you go along with what the president of Levi's wants you to say, you're okay. And so really what that is coerced speech. And silence is coerced speech if you want to speak.
All of that is true. I would just sort of say one thing in addition. I'm not talking about the First Amendment. I'm talking about a culture of free speech where we value others' opinions, where we aren't harmed by words, but we can listen to each other and have open debate and dissent. So I don't want to get into the to and fro of the First Amendment. Of course, it's a privately held company. They can do what they want. But I find it alarming, to say the least, that the ideal of a culture of free speech seems to not even be something that we are interested in anymore.
Growing up at my age, it was a value that was instilled upon you. You learn these things of, I defend to my death your right to say it, that you're innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
These type of things that were so crucial that we learned. And it was in the culture. You saw it on television. You saw it on People for the American Way. You saw it everywhere. And now the ends do justify the means. You're guilty until proven innocent, and you better shut up if you want to feed your family.
And speech is violence, which is how they justify it.
Speech is violence.
Which causes all sorts of problems, because if speech is actually violence, then it's okay to combat that with violence. I mean, I don't want to get into Salman Rushdie, but let's be clear. If his speech is deemed violence, which is all he ever did, he just spoke, then it is okay for someone to rush the stage and stab him multiple times with violence, because you're fighting violence with violence. So there's all sorts of issues with this idea.
To take that for just a second, if earning a living, which is something you need to do to feed your family, and in order to do that, you would have to denounce your religion, well, you could sue them for that.
Yeah.
There is the legal recourse. They can't do that. If you said we don't hire anybody from LGBT type groups, you could sue them on this. But ideological diversity, that I'm sorry, I'm discriminating against you, you're going to have to keep your ideology in a closet.
Yes, technically, that is viewpoint discrimination, right? I mean, they also can't say a company can't say we don't hire Republicans.
But that's kind of what
they say. But that is
say.
what they do, and it's all sort of cloaked in all this other stuff.
You also see it in the media, newspapers. You see it. We don't hire those type.
Yeah, all that is true. So technically, there's probably an employment suit, but I quit. I did not accept the severance.
But you didn't quit. You were pressured out.
I was pressured out, and then I quit before I accepted their terms and took the money so that I could speak. You asked me why.
I'm sure there's a lawyer that says, Jennifer, you still have a suit here. Would you be interested?
Not really. That's my past. I don't really want to tangle with them. I just don't want to.
But your story is so important because if it happens to you,
that's right. It can happen to anyone.
Imagine the person who can't speak well for themselves or somebody who is in a different situation.
Well,
and they have every right to ideological diversity. They have every right to have their preferences and their right to speak.
Yes, and beyond that, and this is why we used to say we supported free speech, this is how we learn the truth. This is how we seek the truth. This is how we learn things. There was a manufactured consensus during COVID. You know, the public health official line and the Democratic Party official line is, this is what everybody says. This is what the doctors say. That's not true. There were a lot of doctors and scientists saying from the beginning, wait, this is not the right way to handle this. But they were shunted and, off to the side. They were vilified. They were called quacks. Doctors from places like Stanford and Oxford and Harvard were called quacks and crazy people, and they were right about all of it. So my point, and this is what frustrates me when, Governor Hochul says of things like, boy, was that a mistake, and everyone just skips the step of, demanding any accountability, is if we had had a conversation in the public square about these things, if we had allowed doctors to express a viewpoint, that was, wait a minute, have we considered X, Y, and Z, we might have gotten to a different answer much sooner. So speech is also important for that, because otherwise everything is just government mandated talking points and the truth doesn't matter and the truth never comes out. And just from a sheer business perspective, like take all the kind of culture of free speech and all that out of it, it's really dangerous in a company or any organization not to prohibit any conversation and open discussion. You're going to make really stupid decisions. So this whole thing is not good for any of us. Well, it's authoritarian.
In one level, you've got companies trying to show how woke they are and how they're pushing their diversity, equity, and inclusion silliness and showing it, but never showing, well, also we have diversity of political thought here. So wouldn't it be great if in our C-suite of folks, we have a vaxxer, we have an anti-vaxxer, we have a Republican, we have a Democrat, we have all these. And because of that diversity, we at Levi's are able to better represent the whole country.
See, that's a great point. And, Levi's operates in over 110 countries around the world. I was very much a part of thinking that we needed and putting policies in place to create a more diverse workforce, diverse in lots of ways. If you're running your business in Asia and it's a bunch of white Western men, which it was for many, many decades, I don't really think you're going to kind of understand what the communities in those countries want. It's a dumb way to run your business. So I believe, and I've gotten, lambasted for this, but I actually believe in diversifying the employee population. I was the sponsor of the Black Employee Resource Group to create community within different cohorts. So I still believe in all of that. As a young woman entering the company, there were no female executives. I had no one to coach. I had no, I believe in that. We're not going to run a successful women's business at Levi's with no women that work on it. Men don't understand what women want from a pair of jeans. So I believe in all that, but you're right. It excludes viewpoint diversity.
Also, it affects customers.
Yeah.
So now, as a customer, I'm walking through Costco, where obviously I buy everything because I'm a man. Because where else can you buy a screwdriver set and your jeans?
And a TV.
And a TV. and a cooler which has a USB port for no reason, but I need it now.
Seems useful.
Yeah. But now I will not buy Levi jeans. And now Levi jeans are a political statement. Instead of me going, these are good jeans, they're worth the value, they'll hold up, I like them, I'll buy them. Now I will not buy Levi jeans for several reasons. The company head did some things on gun control, which what jeans have to do with gun control, I don't know. And as a gun owner, I found it really offensive because obviously Levi's doesn't represent me. And so now as a consumer, I have to confuse denim with politics, where before I was just buying a pair of jeans.
Yeah. I'm writing a book and it talks a lot about a lot of this stuff, not just at Levi's, but in the broader corporate culture. And, I think, it's a complicated subject, but I think the short version is CEOs and C-suite leaders, they don't want to be mistaken for the robber barons of the past. They do not want to be lumped in with, oil company CEOs destroying the planet, although even JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs are very woke now, at least in
because
their public
the owners are not the CEOs. So there's a different period. And so now you have people...
But it's all opposed.
It's opposed, but even a CEO is a hired person. The board hires the CEO. And so the CEO has this outsized power. This is what concerns me. Before, the CEO's job was to do what was in the best interest of shareholders. Now in a woke world, a CEO, I'm supposed to do what's best for equality. And that opens them to all sorts of things, which we should keep in the political realm, not in the corporate realm.
Yeah, I mean, CEOs and other C-suiters, and, I was part of it, so I'm not going to, pretend I wasn't. They sort of refashioned themselves as altruists, which is crazy because they make hundreds times more than CEOs of 20 years ago. I mean, like 400 times more.
But they're saving the planet, so it's worth it.
Yes, but they've sort of burnished their image as one of the people altruists who just want to do good in the world. I mean, it's insane. And they raised woke children in woke schools, and they want to be their kids' best friend, and they want to be respected. There's that dynamic at play as well. They're sort of playing to the Gen Z cohort. They also don't understand social media, a lot of them. I mean, I might be one of my only peers that sort of actively used it, and so there's no context that a few angry comments on Twitter, as Dave Chappelle has said, Twitter's not a real place. Usually things blow over pretty fast. And they don't get that. And even, you say you won't buy Levi's again, and a lot of people with the gun stuff, which had started because a consumer had brought a gun in one of our stores in Georgia and it went off. And the sales associates were very afraid, as you might imagine, the other customers were afraid. He injured himself. And so our whole sort of toe dipping into those waters was just saying, please leave your guns at home. It's a request. That was a request. It was not a command. It was not a rule. It was a request. That sort of just blew the doors off the whole
but when
thing.
your CEO started talking about outlawing weapons...
It went.
That got my attention.
Outlaw. He talked about gun safety, but that's
gun safety for me is a.
I understand. We won't wade into those waters.
It's a whistle, and so if we want to talk about gun control, I'm happy to do that.
Oh no, I don't need to talk about that. We don't need to. We won't have time. I
want to wrap up a couple things. One of Saul Lewinsky's rules for radicals is to triangulate on a person or an entity and destroy it. And what I see now in woke society is that on steroids. You being a perfect example of that, Salman Rushdie being a perfect example of that. But to say we're going to triangulate on Jennifer and we're going to cancel her. And I see it in business after business. I see it in schools. I see it with speech codes in universities. I see what's being taught in grade schools. It is terrifying. It is the kind of re-education camps we saw in China with a happier face.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how happy it is, but yeah, I hear you.
I just want to first thank you, because I think it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing. It takes a lot of courage to speak out. I don't care if you have money in the bank or you don't have money in the bank. I'm assuming you got a lot of hate mail on this one.
Oh yeah, I would.
Like what?
Well, I mean, the trolls came out in full force on Twitter about a year in, including some members of my own family, and were tagging Levi's that, boycott Levi's, fire Jen Say. It was upsetting, to say the least. It's still upsetting. I am estranged from some members of my family. I
think of that.
Don't have, from a lot of my friends, or my former friends. It's hard. I live in a new city. I loved living in San Francisco for 32 years. I gave up my whole life because I thought this was that important. That just gives you a sense of how important I thought it was. my city, my job, my future job prospects, friends, and some family. That's what I lost. And $1 million. So I say all of that not to kind of pat myself on the back, but to say, like, it just gives you a sense of maybe I'm crazy, but how important I thought all of this was. And I thought I might be able to be part of moving this conversation forward a little bit.
You are. You're not part of this conversation. You're a leader in this conversation, because nobody could take that step and not be a leader. And so for those of us watching this, there are so few people to go, see, there are people out there willing to stand up to this woke monster, this cancel culture, and say, bring it on.
Yeah, and to answer your prior question about the hate mail, yeah, I mean, I got one just 2 days ago with a lot of curse words that I won't say. C word, B word, stupid, ugly, this, you know. And I will admit, sometimes they scare me a little.
Yeah.
I mean, like, for my physical safety.
Well, I've had 3 decades of death threats, so I kind of know what that's like.
And I had them in, I mean, I got a lot, you know, I alluded to it briefly, but I was an elite gymnast as a child, and I was very outspoken about the abuses in the sport. I wrote a memoir, which was the first person account of it in 2008, and the world was not ready to hear what I had to say about the sport. And so I got a lot of horrible letters, I'll call them then too, and the world really didn't come around to it until
and you
Larry
were vindicated
Nassar,
again.
with Larry Nassar. And that was in my mind the whole time. I mean, that took 10 years. I was like, I can stick it out. I can take it. They're going to come around. It's so obvious. So I'm not a stranger to receiving that kind of hate. But this is like next level, as you might imagine.
When I see the mixture of virtue into corporatism, and we'll just use the value V. So whatever V is, if CEOs and companies can use V to virtue to say these things, that's great if you agree with V. But what if culture changes and instead it's Trumpism that is the virtue, or something that you just can't agree with, but now that's the virtue du jour. Now how are you going to feel? And if we kept with the liberal, truly liberal, classical liberal standpoint that we used to have in this country, it wouldn't matter, because corporations don't use their megaphones for social change. They use their megaphone for their product and their shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to think through a lot of this. I'm writing a book. It'll come out pretty soon. You know, Levi's had long taken stances that I supported in terms of furthering equality for their employees. So I'll give you a specific example. Same-sex partner benefits. They were the first Fortune 500 company in 1992 to do that. No one was talking about marriage equality or any of that. That was like very forward-facing. That was for our employees. It also extended that to non-married couples that were together. It was basically same partner benefits, right?
Was that?
I support that. Ooh, I did the touching I'm not supposed to do. I support that. And there were years and years of us doing that.
Let me ask you a question on that. I support that too. I support gay marriage. I think it's terrific. But from Levi's point of view, was that a virtue signal, or was that, hey, we can get better employees if we have a competitive advantage because we want to treat our employees well, because then we get more better quality employees. So this is a way to help our bottom line. Or was it we're going into the civil rights aspect of it?
I think it was a little column A and a little column B, and it's the right thing to do for our employees. We had a large gay employee population. San Francisco is a leader in gay civil rights, so it was very much, in the water. And I think they believed it was just the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. It was not popular. People didn't like it.
But also the difference is...
I mean, people inside liked it. Outside, people did not like it.
But what you were doing at Levi to give same-sex benefits had only to do with your employees.
That's right.
It had nothing to do with other families.
That's right.
And other things.
And it extended equality to all employees. Yeah. Whereas in my case, as you've described, my right to speech, that was rescinded because I was saying the wrong thing, right? as you indicated.
You were saying the truthful thing.
Well, it was wrong thing.
Wrong think.
Yeah.
It is 1984.
Yeah.
And
So, yes, that's the line I'm drawing, and that's the distinction I'm drawing. As, with a little hindsight, I think I still support extending and taking stands, if you will. You don't have to talk about it publicly, but that, extend equality to all employees, or safety, or, we integrated factories in the South before the law required it. That's another example. I support all that. That was controversial. People did not like that. Outside, I am contracting, I think, where I once was on other issues in terms of kind of loudly declaring and signing amicus briefs to the Supreme Court and all this kind of thing on other issues.
Our country is beautiful because we respect minorities. I'm not talking racial minorities. I'm talking political minorities.
Sure.
That we protect. It costs us nothing to have somebody who agrees with us spout off about it. That's not liberal. Liberal is letting somebody spout off on something you despise.
Yeah.
And why we ended it just with that as well, which when the ACLU took on the Skokie, Illinois case,
yeah,
and now today's ACLU would never touch it.
They don't even talk about speech anymore.
No. Matter of fact, a case here in Colorado ACLU is fighting on the opposite side of speech codes.
Yeah, it's really upsetting. I was a longtime supporter of the ACLU. I don't send them money anymore. I don't know what they're doing,
there are some other organizations who you can help out.
You can tell me.
Jen, say thank you so much.
Yeah.
I can't wait till the book happens. I can't wait till you work on the movie, and let's do this again soon.
Awesome. Nice to meet you.
Nice
Thanks
meeting
for having me.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.